So, like many place names in Vienna, the word Freyung gives a lot of insight into the history of this square. And it's actually related to what used to go on in this church. And this church is called the Schottenkirche, which means the Scottish church, and it was founded in 1155 by the Babenberg Duke Heinrich II. He was so pious that his subjects called him Ja, so mir Gott, which is short for "if God is willing to help me," which is what he supposedly said at the end of almost every sentence. And so Heinrich Ja, so mir Gott summoned Irish-Scottish missionaries to Vienna to found a Benedictine monastery. And back in those days, the Irish-Scottish missionaries were sort of famous for doing that sort of thing. They were kind of like the special forces of the Vatican, and they used to go all over Europe and found monasteries, and they founded one here in Vienna, and this was the church that belonged to it. So obviously, if you know your history at all, you'll realize that this is not the original church from 1155. There have actually been a bunch of churches on this site. And it seems like it's really kind of an unlucky site, and if I were the people in charge of this church, I might have given it up as a bad job, but they were very persistent. The first church here that was built in 1155 was a Romanesque church, again with very thick walls, and that was destroyed in a fire. And then the next was a Gothic church with pointed arches, and that was destroyed in an earthquake. And that wasn't maintained very well after the earthquake. It was sort of still standing, but wasn't maintained very well. And then what happened was that the emperor came visiting the church with his family, and some stones fell down from the ceiling. Everybody thought that the church was collapsing, and everybody fled in a panic. And a few people died in the crush, and the emperor was pushed to the floor. Later, it turned out there were just some little boys playing up in the bell tower, and they dislodged a couple of loose stones. But anyway, they realized that everybody was scared about the church, so they decided to renovate it, and they rebuilt the tower. And then the tower fell down again a year later because they had built it on the old foundations, which were not very good. So finally, they decided they were going to completely renovate it in the Baroque style, which is what you see here. And one of the characteristics of the Baroque is the flat columns, and also you can see there are lots of very swirly carvings with gold ornament. And they rebuilt that church in the Baroque style in the 1600s, just in time for the Turkish siege. So it was damaged here in the Turkish siege in 1683 because the entire Freyung here, the entire square, was set on fire. And the people that they thought had done it, the people that they believed were traitors or who were even just unreliable, they sort of did these very quick military trials and dispensed some summary justice and hanged them here in the square. Also in this church, the lead defender of the Viennese army during the siege, Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg, he's buried here in this church. But back to the name Freyung. In the Middle Ages, the Irish-Scottish monks did not get along at all with the local Viennese authorities. So what happened was that the Pope decided to give them independent jurisdiction within their church. And that meant that if somebody was on the run from the law in Vienna, they could come out here and claim asylum. So it's sort of like when you get to base and hide and go seek, and if you touch it, you're all good. It worked exactly the same way. And that's where the name Freyung comes from, because Frey is a cognate for the English word free. So basically it was like a freeing church. So you'd come here and you would have a freeing. You would experience a freeing. So that's the name Freyung.